The question is that this bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Perth.
Thank you, Madam. Today, I was interested listening to the member for Kooyong in her address, and seeing this incredibly conventional view of indeed what we do need to do to take Australia forward. Now, we are dealing with the appropriations bills here. There is a lot in the budget that we will have the opportunity to talk about in as other more specific legislation comes before this House. But I particularly want to talk today about a range of agencies whose funding will indeed be cut as a result of the appropriation bills that we're considering today. And indeed, looking at what that shows of the government's very, very narrow and short-sighted understanding of what our economic needs are, and indeed what is the role of government in the 21st century to drive the economy forward. So we're going to put aside, from my point of view, I'm just going to put aside for the time being all of the discussion of the great unfairnesses in this budget and just concentrate on the great stupidities. And in particular, I want to look at the cuts that have been made to science and research agencies across this country. Now, implicit in all the commentary that we get from the Treasurer and indeed from the member for Kooyong is that the way in which Higgins, sorry, excuse me, sorry, member Higgins, sorry. I knew you were part of the Liberal royal family somewhere, but the member for Higgins. But inherent in this her discussion, and indeed you get it from the Treasurer, is this notion that the thing that government has to do is to keep as small as possible, to keep out of the way of the private sector, to create the conditions for the private sector, and that will see business flourish. And indeed, they say that very often the public sector is crowding out the private sector and creating constraint on there being private sector development, and that is what is holding our economy back. Well, I put it to you that is, and that whilst, of course, one has to be very mindful of creating the environment and the operating conditions in which the private sector can thrive, this is to completely underestimate what really is driving the modern economy, where the big changes in the economy is going, and where indeed those big changes have come from. And of course, very critically, if we look at the great developments in over the last 30, 40 years, the vast majority of those, interestingly, turn out to have been developed by the public sector. These are developments that never would have taken place in the private sector. Sure, it's the private sector that once the research is done and the great idea has been developed, that it is the private sector that grabs that idea and commercialises it. But without the active and strong investment in the public sector, that we would not see those things that really now so much form the basis of our economy. The internet itself was developed in the United States under the government defence programs. We've seen defence and science programs. So the very internet itself. We've seen the equivalent in Australia in terms of the development of Wi-Fi, which came out of the CSIRO. We've seen the other developments, the touchscreen, which is now increasingly part of the technology that is driving forward industry. That was again developed in the United States. I had a very interesting example when I went to visit Oak Ridge Laboratories in the United States, those laboratories that developed the the atom bomb, to see the creative work that was being done and to hear them, these researchers in this government-funded instrumentality explaining the funding that they received from Toyota for the sale of every Toyota Prius results in a royalty being paid to the Oak Ridge Laboratories, because the fundamental technology of that fuel cell that drives the hybrid car was again developed in that in a government-funded agency through government-funded programs, and indeed the amount that has been spent in the United States through their largely defence-oriented operations and research agencies has been extraordinary, and the benefit that has yielded for the US economy has been tremendous. So we've ourselves, as I said, we've got some examples here in Australia. We know CSIRO has been responsible for the Wi-Fi, the development, I believe, also of been involved in the development of radar, the first effective influenza treatment, and the Hendra virus vaccine, amongst many more, and doing very, very interesting research that would not be done by the private sector. Research into, as one of the world's biggest producers of titanium, finding new ways of the production of titanium and the use of 3D printing with titanium. All of this really important but very expensive work that requires long lead times and very, very patient investment that just simply would not be done by the private sector. Now, so what is our response to that reality of the need for us to be there, to be out there, participating in the science, the new science and technology? What have we done? We have absolutely gutted our scientific agencies and gutted the research effort. We see within these appropriation bills that we are looking for today, looking at today, cuts of at least $878 million across the forward estimates to our major science and research agencies. CSIRO alone receiving funding cuts of $111 million, and they are going to, in fact, be losing approximately 10% of their capacity and staff at a time where we know that we need to reposition ourselves, where we know that we cannot rely just on being a quarry, that we need to create a future for ourselves. And that if we had any sense, if we were looking at what has worked around the world, where countries have got that edge in science and technology, we would be knowing that we need to be pouring more money into these agencies, not stripping them out of funds. And I find this really very worrying that we have got such narrow-minded, undeveloped intellects seemingly in charge of the making of these very important strategic decisions. We've got people that are locked very much in a small government Ayn Rand mould, and who, no doubt, and part of the Treasurer really does believe that's all that we have to do. Where is the imagination that is going to drive us forward? Where are we going to find those people that are going to be prepared to understand what the investment in science and technology that needs to come from government in order to create those circumstances where we can be players at a global scale, not entities which are just technology takers, but that we will facilitate, that we have that ability to facilitate being technology creators. And we talk about wanting to have universities, and quite rightfully, in the top 10 or the top 20 in the world. But if we're not investing in research, if we are stripping out $800 million over the forward estimates from research, we are not going to be up there. We're not going to be fantastic world-class universities. We need to invest. We had an interesting debate this morning in the other place, in the other chamber, where there was a lot of pontification about how fantastic this government was going to be in terms of the development of the north of Australia. And in the course of the hearings that have been going on with the Northern Australia Committee, it is becoming very clear very evident that the availability of water is an absolutely number one essential issue that we need to address, that we need to get right for the development of Northern Australia, for Northern Australia to be able to take its rightful place and to have a sustainable level of development catering for the increasing food needs, not only of our own community but of those of Asia to our north. But when we actually go and the evidence that we've been getting is that CSIRO have been doing tremendous work in this area. They have, over the past 4 to 5 years, have produced some very, very important studies. But they stress to us the need for them to be able to really get a clear picture of the sustainability, to really enable us to be able to develop at an appropriate scale, that there is a lot more detailed work to be done. So what have we done? As I said, it slashed $111 million from the CSIRO budget, reduced its capacity by 10% just at the time that we say that we want to drive Northern Australia forward. And we know water is going to become an increasingly important issue as we go through a drying climate in most of the southern half of the continent. But we just look at the funding reductions. We see the Sustainable Rural Water Use and Infrastructure Program, that's been cut by $324 million. Perhaps not so much a research program, but the more purely research programs have likewise been cut. And I'm just going to, we've got the Water Resources Assessment Research Grant has been cut. We've got the Scientific and Science and Research Agency, we mentioned those before, $146 million. So in addition to the $111 million that has been cut from the CSIRO, that we have had an additional $30 million cut from other agencies. We've had the CRCs, I believe, have lost something in the order of $80 million over the next 4 years. And CRCs are really important because they bring together a very important collaborations of government and skills across a number of government entities and with the private sector. So CRCs are in fact very much the agencies that will be driving forward the innovation into the future. But we have seen a dramatic cut, and indeed the next round of funding has been entirely chopped out. And of course those CRCs are extremely concerned because just in February this year they were asked to make submissions for the next round of funding, and a great deal of effort has gone in by those organisations, taking the government at its word in February that there would be an additional round of funding, and have spent many hundreds of thousands of dollars that have to be cut out of the budget. And in fact, that entire round virtually will not exist. We see the fisheries RDC would be one of the hardest hit by the changes. Fisheries research also is taking a big hit through reduced Commonwealth funding for the Fisheries Resources Research Fund Development Program. So if we go through and look at the list of projects that are being cut, the science and research budget that is being stripped out, we see here a failure, as I say, a really critical failure to actually understand that there is increasingly an important role for government to invest in this level of science and technology, because it is only in that way that are we going to be able to participate as something other than technology takers into the 21st century.